to another edition of Cult Movie Club. My name is Rob, and today I'm going to be talking about my personal favourite directors. So these are guys that are like, they put their own stamp on the material that they've got, and you can clearly tell you're watching a film by that person. So I'm going to go through like a top 10 list, and I'm going to give reasons as to why I like them, and my favourite like selection of their work. Some of these films I've talked about already loads of times in these videos, so I'm going to glaze through some and talk more about others. So let's get started. So the first pick is a guy who, the minute you watch, you know from the second the film starts that you know who's made this film, from basically the way the characters look, from how everything's designed, through to the score. This guy uses Danny Elfman for most of his films, and it's Tim Burton. So, started off his career with Beetlejuice, which is by far still one of his best films, and then moved onto the Batman franchise, which wasn't even a franchise then. It was just a, let's see if we can make a Batman film. Let's get that young guy to do it, Tim Burton, and there you go. That is a great film. He also did a sequel. Then he moved away from that and he also made Edward Scissorhands, which is Johnny Depp, another great visual film. And then in the late 90s did stuff like Mad Attacks, which is pretty funny. And then has recently done a lot of films with Johnny Depp, including Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Sweeney Todd, and Dark Shadows. At the moment, he's doing a lot of stuff for Disney. He did the Alice in Wonderland, which wasn't bad, and he's recently done Dumbo, which I've got to confess I haven't watched. But yeah, he's done some classic stuff, and like I said, puts his own unique stamp on anything that he's worked on. My personal favourite, like I said, I mentioned Beetlejuice, but my personal favourite has to be the original Batman, because I remember that film coming out and how excited I was to see it, and I was not let down by it whatsoever. Michael Keaton is probably my favourite Batman also. And, Jack Nicholson does a great performance as a Joker. So that's number 10, and that's Tim Burton. So next guy, he's, influenced so many filmmakers. And if you want to watch a gangster film, then you ought to be looking at something that this guy has made. And, all the gangster films have either been influenced by this guy or he's made one of them. And it's Martin Scorsese. So started his career with Mean Streets, and then went into a working relationship with Robert De Niro. Did a Taxi Driver, King of Comedy, Goodfellas, Casino, all those great films. And then in the 2000s, he started working with Leonardo DiCaprio, and we got films like The Departed, Shutter Island. Wolf of Wall Street, which is a brilliant film. So, a really influential filmmaker. My personal favourite has got to be Goodfellas, however, which is part of this De Niro set, which I've got here, which is a really cool set. Some really good films in this. But, yeah, it's got to be Goodfellas. I think that's probably the first gangster film I ever watched. And I was pretty shocked by how violent it was, and it's one of those films as well that is like 3 hours long, but only feels like half of that time because you are so into it the whole time. So yeah, that's my favourite. But King of Comedy is also really good as well. That is a superb comedy. Obviously, the new Joker film took a lot of stuff from that. So yeah, brilliant, great director. Next is basically it's an action guy. You don't get many action directors that actually put like a significant stamp on the work. For a lot of action films, it's just like studio guys. You have had people in the past like John McTiernan and stuff like that. But this is like one guy who was proper visionary at the time and did a lot of things for that genre, and it's John Woo, who I saw Hard Boiled and The Killer back in the very early 90s, and I think they were like the first foreign films that I actually watched and sat through. And really enjoyed him. And then he did his Hollywood debut with a film I've talked about many times, Target, which is a Jean-Claude Van Damme film, which absolutely blew my mind when I was a kid. it's still one of my favourite action films, as Garvey said. You know, the influence that this guy's had over the cinema, you know, guys like Robert Rodriguez and, you know, all these like kind of crazy action scenes you see now, they've stemmed from those early films of John Woo. Obviously, he in the mid-90s, when he rose to prominence with Face Off and Mission Impossible 2 and stuff like that, still great films. Face Off is a fantastic, fantastic film. It's got one and only Nick Cage in it, doing a proper Nick Cage performance. And obviously John Travolta's in that as well, and it's definitely a John Woo film. And Mission Impossible 2, although considered the worst in that franchise, is still pretty entertaining. So yeah, John Woo, obviously my favourite John Woo film is Hard Target. I'm not going to talk anymore about it because I've talked a lot about that on this channel. So let's move straight on to my next favourite director. So we're going into horror territory here, and that's John Carpenter, who's, you know, kick-started a big slasher thing with Halloween, and then throughout the 80s pumped out loads of great films. You know, Big Trouble in Little China, They Live, into the 90s with vampires and Ghosts of Mars, In the Mouth of Madness, stuff like that. You can always tell you're watching a John Carpenter film, mainly through who's in it, and the score. John Carpenter's one of those rare directors that scores all his own films, and it's a very synthy kind of score. You know you're watching a John Carpenter film straight from the off. So one of my favourite horror directors, most definitely. You know, he's done some of my favourites of his, Prince of Darkness. That's a proper scary horror film, that is. A really eerie film. Kind of makes you feel uncomfortable throughout the whole running time. Although the plot is totally, you explain the plot to someone, it sounds totally ridiculous, but the way it's executed and the score is just absolutely brilliant. But my personal favourite has to be The Thing, which, although actually this is one of the films that John Carpenter didn't score. It was scored by Ennio Morricone, sorry. It's like he was scoring it with John Carpenter's music in mind, because it could have been a John Carpenter score. The effects in this film for the time are absolutely brilliant, and it still holds up today, and it's still a fantastic film. So staying in the horror genre somewhat, my next pick is David Cronenberg. I saw, I think the first David Cronenberg film I saw when I was really young was Scanners, which I was like, wow, that was just crazy. And then a lot later on I saw stuff like Existence and Naked Lunch, and then saw some of his earlier work, Shivers, Rabid, all that stuff. Such a good director. Again, you know when you're watching a David Cronenberg film, because no one makes films like David Cronenberg, apart from his son, who's just started making movies now. You won't get anyone who makes a film like David Cronenberg in the kind of style and with the visuals that he puts across. You know, it's one of the only first guys to really delve into the whole body horror thing. So, you know, it's influenced so many horror filmmakers over the years, especially today with the stuff that's coming out today in the genre. You can just tell that they've been brought up on David Cronenberg. Yeah, fantastic director. Recently, not done a lot recently, and he did move away from the horror genre somewhat. History of Violence was really good, although my favourite from like the last 20 years has definitely got to be Eastern Promises, which is David Cronenberg did a gangster film, and it's exactly what you get, and it's really good. He's making a new film apparently. I can't remember the title off my head now, but have a look on IMDb. There is something in the works, and obviously his son Brandon Cronenberg has just done Possessor, which I am dying to watch. I can't wait to watch it. My personal David Cronenberg film, however, is Videodrome, which is a perfect film which showcases all his like kind of visual ideas, and yeah, it's the one. If you want David Cronenberg all packaged up, this is, I think, the best one that shows it all. Pretty crazy film, but really good. So moving on from that then, is someone I watched a lot of films of later in life, so I didn't really see much of his stuff when I was young, and not like most of these directors I'm talking about now. I saw the films when I was quite young, with the exception of one. these were all films that I like started watching in like my 20s and stuff, as I was like delving through into like back catalogues of films. So it's Stanley Kubrick. I'd seen The Shining when I was young, like everyone did, and scared me. Really good horror, expertly made, but didn't really take any notice of who directed it or anything like that. It was only later, and I saw A Clockwork Orange at the cinema when it got re-released after his death. And yeah, that was a great cinema experience. And then since went on to go and have a look at everything else I did. One film that just impressed me massively was 2001: A Space Odyssey, which is nearly my favourite of this guy's work because it still stands up today. I've watched that film recently and it still looks phenomenal. And the ideas, the visual ideas, and the choice of music that he used, with what happens towards the end course of the film and all the kind of visuals, it's absolutely mind blowing film, especially for the time it was made. Very influential also to filmmakers like Christopher Nolan and stuff like that. Notorious for being a perfectionist. Redoing scenes, doing hundreds of shots and stuff like that. A lot of people do know about the story of The Shining, and the actress having a bit of a breakdown at how many takes he was asking them to do. Also, Tom Cruise lost a lot of roles in the late 90s due to having to spend 2 years making Eyes Wide Shut. A perfectionist, but it shows in his films. They are, he's perfect. Every film is like the perfect representation of that genre. So, like, you have the perfect horror film, you've got the perfect war film of like Full Metal Jacket. You've got a perfect drama. He's just a great director, very influential these days. My favourite is The Shining, but a very close second is 2001, to be honest. And I have this in this Visionary Filmmakers collection, which is, if you're not really got into his work, that you need to get this and just work through this. It's got all the classics there. So that Shining, that's my favourite horror film from that director. So next is someone who came out in the early 90s, when I was just like kind of watching action films and horror films and stuff like that. And I watched a film called Pulp Fiction, which just blew my mind because of the structure of it all, and it took a couple of watches for me to get what was going on. But yeah, fantastic film. And has since gone on to do things like Jackie Brown, Kill Bill films, Inglourious Bastards, Hateful Eight. Obviously, I'm talking about Quentin Tarantino. Again, when you're watching a Tarantino film, the choices of music that he uses, again, he has certain actors that he works with, and the big thing with Tarantino films is the dialogue. You're watching a Quentin Tarantino film because it's Quentin Tarantino dialogue. Hugely influential. And if you're not into films, you know who this guy is. I really enjoyed his most recent work, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. I thought that was brilliant, really well done. Really looking forward to rewatching it. Kill Bill is also a fantastic film for what it is. But my favourite has to be the film I saw the first time, which is Pulp Fiction. Again, I just love this film, and not really just for nostalgia. It's just so well made, so well put together. Rebooted the careers of John Travolta and a few other people. So, brilliant film, amazing soundtrack also. So, there we go. Next is a filmmaker that hasn't actually made that many films compared to a lot of the other guys I'm talking about here. He's probably, he's had like 10 years of not doing anything, and before that he'd not done anything for 10 years. But the early work that he started out with in the 80s and going through to the 90s is extraordinary stuff and very, very influential. Also holds a record for the biggest grossing film of all time. which he's probably done that twice with, I think, with Titanic and Avatar. So I'm obviously talking about James Cameron, um, who I saw, one of the first films that I really ever saw was The Terminator. Again, a film I've talked a lot about on this channel. Um, I also saw very early Aliens, which again is another one of my favourite films. I actually prefer that to the original, so that's how much of a good job that he did with that sequel. Going through to the 90s again, he perfected his own work with Terminator 2, which he made like a perfect sequel to an already great film. Although the original is still my favourite, but Terminator 2 is just as good, really. Going through to True Lies, and then obviously the mammoth of Titanic and Avatar. Unfortunately, has decided to spend most of his later life now making Avatar sequels that we have still yet to see any of. I don't expect them to be bad. They will definitely be something new and something different, because that's what he does. He was working on things in the Terminator that no one had done at that point with a mini budget, with stuff like Avatar, he was spearheading technology that had not even been around or been made yet. Great director, very influential. Again, another one where you're watching a James Cameron film. All his films seem to have a tint of blue to them, if you've ever noticed. Obviously, my favourite James Cameron film is The Terminator, but anything from the 80s and 90s is just second to none. Great filmmaking, but that's my favourite. Next is someone when we was in the late 90s, I was kind of getting into different kind of things, and I was looking for different things, and someone suggested I should start watching films by someone called David Lynch. The first film that I saw of his would have been Eraserhead, which I'd just never seen anything like it, and I didn't really understand it, and I really probably still don't. But I was fascinated by what I'd seen, and I was curious to see some of his other stuff. So I obviously went through his back catalogue. So Blue Velvet, fantastic film. I obviously knew him from Twin Peaks back in the day, but never really realised who this guy was or anything like that. Wild at Heart, which stars Nicolas Cage, which I don't really need to talk about. You got David Lynch and Nicolas Cage, same film. It's going to be very, very different. But the film that impressed me the most out of all these was a film called Lost Highway, which I had already owned the soundtrack of, but never seen the film because I was into a lot of the artists. And it was all curated by Trent Reznor, who I'm a big fan of. And that was another reason why I was turned on to David Lynch, because in college I'd done a big thing about Trent Reznor, and someone said, "Oh, you should watch a David Lynch film." And I was like, "Okay, yeah." Completely opened my mind to this different kind of filmmaking and these different kind of films. After watching these David Lynch films, I started looking at David Cronenberg films and started looking at all these other, different ways of, being entertained, basically. It's, if you can sit and appreciate these films, then you'll have basically open your mind to a lot of other stuff. I have to thank whoever recommended David Lynch to me. I can't quite think of who it was, but yeah, my favourite of all the films I talked about is Lost Highway, because I think that is perfectly puts across all these kind of, again, visual ideas. Don't expect to understand it too much. I've watched it quite a few times, and there's still things that I don't quite get. But it's one of those. He's one of those filmmakers. You watch the film to experience a film made by him. Don't expect to come out of there exactly knowing what you've just seen, and that's kind of what I love about him. In the 2000s, he did Mulholland Drive, which is considered his best film. I think it's a great film, but like I said, for me, it's Lost Highway. Unfortunately, has not done anything really since Inland Empire, although he does put a lot of things out on his website, little short films and stuff like that. I would love to see him do something, but we will see, maybe, fingers crossed. So, getting down to my favourite director now, and I think a lot of people will know who this is, because I've not mentioned him already. Whenever this guy is bringing something out, I am so excited to see it. And he's one of those rare directors that can get a 200, 300 million budget for a film and do what he wants. You know, a lot of guys can't get away with that. A lot of directors can't get away with that. If they're getting that much money, then they are basically working for the studio. Whereas this guy, although he does work for a studio, he gets to do what he wants. And his ideas are grand. It is Christopher Nolan, who I first saw Memento back when it came out and really, really enjoyed it. The way it was structured, it was so different. He then went on to do Insomnia with Al Pacino, which again I enjoyed, with Robin Williams also, was another one of my favourite actors. Really enjoyed that. But then really, obviously he became a household name with the Batman franchise, a Dark Knight trilogy. Batman Begins was a great reboot of the Batman franchise, kind of stripped away all, what had happened with the last two films. It became a bit really cartoony, and he stripped it right back, and it was pretty dark. But no one could be prepared really for what came next, which was The Dark Knight, which is the darkest superhero film ever made, and possibly one of the best, with a standout performance by Heath Ledger, which is totally amazing. In between that, though, he did a film called The Prestige, which is a great film, absolutely fantastic film. He also, when he was doing this Dark Knight trilogy, I think it was after The Dark Knight, he directed one of my favourite films of all time, which is Inception, which is a huge, huge film based on an original idea, which you just don't see that these days. All these huge films are normally part of a big franchise or a superhero franchise or part of something that's already in the mainstream consciousness. This was totally new. It was something different, and it was absolutely brilliant film. Absolutely brilliant. I've talked about Inception on previous videos, so I'm not going into it too much. But most recently as well, he's done Dunkirk, which is a great war film. And managed to get a good performance out of Harry Styles as well, which, yeah, that was great. Obviously rounded off his Dark Knight trilogy with The Dark Knight Rises, which is considered the weakest, but when you're coming off those films, it was still really good. And we had Interstellar, which had some really grand ideas, and again, I felt was very influenced by Stanley Kubrick. And then recently, just as the pandemic started kicking in, the only person to put a film out at that time was Christopher Nolan, and that was Tenet, which I think will, in time, be considered an absolute classic film. I think it left a lot of people scratching their heads. But yeah, fantastic. Again, fantastic idea. Visually great, amazing soundtrack. Everything I love about the way these guys make these films. So my favourite Christopher Nolan film is Inception. Everyone who has watched any of these videos knows that. But I like all of his films, and like I said, whenever he's working on anything, I'm really excited to see it, and you can't ask for any more than that. So thank you for watching this video. These are just my favourite directors. I'm not saying these are the best directors, and there's some big guns that I've not mentioned here, like Steven Spielberg and lots and lots of others. David Fincher. Just to be clear, I love both of those, but this was kind of just like a top 10. These are just my personal favourites. I'm not saying these are the best directors in the world, but they're definitely in there. If you want to see a great film, have a look at some of the work that these guys have done here. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you've enjoyed it, then please subscribe and check out some of the older ones. Thanks for watching. See you again soon.